The United States wasn't prepared for the news that shook the world on October 4, 1957. The Soviet Union had successfully launched Sputnik, the first artificial satellite to orbit Earth. A small metal sphere with 4 antenna arms, it circled our planet every 96 minutes. Americans could see it with binoculars, and even hear its distinctive beep-beep-beep transmitted on radio frequencies. The technological achievement was undeniable, and deeply unsettling for a nation that had assumed scientific superiority. The shock of Sputnik triggered immediate soul-searching. Congress held hearings. Newspapers questioned American education, particularly in science and mathematics. President Eisenhower, initially dismissive of the achievement's significance, soon recognized the political and military implications of falling behind in space technology. Within months, he established both NASA and DARPA, organizations that would transform America's technological landscape. Despite these quick responses, the Soviets extended their lead. In April 1961, cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space, completing a full orbit of Earth in his Vostok spacecraft. Just 3 weeks later, America's Alan Shepard finally reached space, but only in a brief 15-minute suborbital flight. The contrast was striking and uncomfortable. "We are behind," acknowledged President Kennedy in his May 1961 address to Congress. The admission was painful for a nation unaccustomed to second place, but it set the stage for the most ambitious technological project in human history. Kennedy proposed not just catching up with Soviet achievements, but leapfrogging them entirely. "I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to Earth." The audacity of this goal cannot be overstated. In 1961, America had a total of just 15 minutes of spaceflight experience. The Saturn V rocket needed for lunar missions didn't exist. Neither did the spacecraft, spacesuits, navigation systems, or countless other technologies required for a moon landing. Kennedy was essentially promising to invent an entirely new field of engineering and perfect it within 8 years. Behind the scenes, NASA officials wondered if it was even possible. Yet publicly, America embraced the challenge with remarkable unity and purpose. Congress approved massive funding increases. Universities expanded engineering programs. Companies across the country pivoted to aerospace work. An estimated 400,000 people would eventually contribute to the Apollo program. The early years brought progress, but also heartbreak. The Mercury program successfully placed 6 astronauts in orbit, building vital experience. However, the January 1967 Apollo 1 fire killed astronauts Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee during a ground test. The tragedy forced a complete redesign of the Apollo spacecraft and a painful reassessment of NASA's approach to safety. Meanwhile, Soviet achievements continued. They launched the first woman into space, conducted the first spacewalk, and set endurance records for time in orbit. These milestones received worldwide attention and acclaim. What wasn't widely known was that the Soviet space program was fragmenting internally, with competing design bureaus and shifting priorities undermining their lunar landing efforts. By 1968, America's methodical approach began showing results. Apollo 7 successfully tested the redesigned command module in Earth orbit. Apollo 8 traveled to the Moon, orbited it 10 times, and returned safely, a stunning achievement that brought the lunar surface tantalizingly close. The stage was set for America to attempt something unprecedented in human history. The summer of 1969 arrived with a mixture of anticipation and tension across America. The Apollo program had made remarkable progress, but the most challenging test still lay ahead. On July 16, the enormous Saturn V rocket, still the most powerful ever built, thundered away from Launch Pad 39A at Kennedy Space Center. Aboard were astronauts Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins, carrying the hopes of a nation and the dreams of humanity. The journey to the moon took 3 days. While Americans followed every communication from space, the astronauts performed the complex maneuvers needed to position themselves for landing. Collins would remain in lunar orbit aboard the command module Columbia, while Armstrong and Aldrin descended to the surface in the lunar module Eagle. The landing itself brought heart-stopping moments that few watching from Earth realized at the time. As Eagle approached its landing site in the Sea of Tranquility, Armstrong noticed dangerous boulders scattered across the terrain. Taking partial manual control, he guided the craft forward, searching for a safe spot while fuel reserves dwindled alarmingly. Mission Control tracked their descent with growing concern. Only 30 seconds of fuel remained when Armstrong finally announced, "Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed." Those watching on television, an estimated 600 million people worldwide, witnessed history unfold 6 hours later when Armstrong descended the ladder and placed his boot in the lunar dust. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. With those words, America had achieved what once seemed impossible. The nation that had started the space race playing catch-up had decisively taken the lead. Over the next 3 years, 5 more Apollo missions successfully landed on the Moon. Each venture became more ambitious than the last. Apollo 15, 16, and 17 included lunar rovers that allowed astronauts to explore miles of terrain. Scientists received priceless lunar samples from different regions, helping unravel the Moon's geological history, and by extension, Earth's. The Soviet Union, meanwhile, attempted to downplay the significance of the lunar landings, claiming their unmanned sample return missions and lunar rovers accomplished similar scientific goals without risking human lives. Behind the scenes, however, their own moon rocket, the massive N1, suffered catastrophic failures during test launches. The USSR quietly abandoned its lunar landing program without ever publicly acknowledging it had existed. America's triumph extended beyond just reaching the Moon first. The Apollo program demonstrated unprecedented technological capabilities, from the Saturn V's 5 massive F1 engines to the computer systems that guided navigation with remarkable precision, despite having less computing power than a modern calculator. The Apollo guidance computer pioneered software engineering techniques still used today. Perhaps more importantly, the program showed what humans could accomplish with unified purpose and adequate resources. Technologies developed for Apollo later transformed industries from healthcare to transportation. Materials science advanced decades in just years. Computer miniaturization accelerated dramatically. By 1972, when Eugene Cernan became the last human to walk on the Moon, America had achieved complete dominance in space exploration. The nation that began the race watching a Soviet satellite pass overhead had established an unassailable lead in human spaceflight. As Cernan prepared to board the lunar module for the final time, he left footprints in the dust and spoke words that captured the achievement. "We leave as we came, and God willing, we shall return, with peace and hope for all mankind." The end of the Apollo program in 1972 marked not a conclusion, but a transition in America's space ambitions. While lunar missions captured global imagination, NASA was already developing a revolutionary new concept: a reusable spacecraft that could dramatically reduce the cost of reaching orbit. The space shuttle would transform access to space for the next 3 decades. When Columbia rose from Launch Pad 39A in April 1981, it represented a fundamentally different approach to spaceflight. Unlike the disposable rockets of previous programs, the shuttle could return to Earth and fly again. Its cargo bay, large enough to hold a school bus, opened new possibilities for deploying satellites, conducting research, and eventually building long-term structures in orbit. The shuttle era saw America's space capabilities expand in multiple directions simultaneously. Astronauts deployed critical satellites like the tracking and data relay system that revolutionized communications. They launched interplanetary probes like Magellan to Venus and Galileo to Jupiter. Perhaps most significantly, they placed the Hubble Space Telescope in orbit, an instrument that would transform our understanding of the cosmos after an initial flaw was corrected by a dramatic shuttle repair mission. While the Soviets developed their own short-lived shuttle called Buran, America's program continued operating for decades, flying 135 missions. This sustained presence in space allowed for unprecedented experience in living and working in the vacuum of space. Astronauts conducted hundreds of spacewalks, learning valuable lessons about constructing and maintaining spacecraft in the harsh environment of orbit. The shuttle program wasn't without tragedy. The losses of Challenger in 1986 and Columbia in 2003, along with their crews, were devastating setbacks that forced deep reassessments of risk management and safety culture. Yet after each disaster, America recommitted to its space program, recognizing that exploration inherently involves danger while working to minimize unnecessary risks. By the 1990s, a new era of international cooperation began to replace Cold War competition. The fall of the Soviet Union transformed the geopolitical landscape. Former rivals became partners in what would become humanity's most ambitious space project to date, the International Space Station, ISS. Construction of the ISS began in 1998 and continued for more than a decade. American shuttles performed most of the heavy lifting, delivering major components and supporting complex assembly operations. Russian Soyuz capsules provided reliable crew transportation. European, Japanese, and Canadian modules added specialized capabilities. The result was a permanent human outpost in orbit, continuously inhabited since November 2000. The station represented American leadership in a different form, not through competition, but through coordination of a 15-nation partnership. The U.S. contributed the largest portion of resources and technology, while establishing frameworks for successful international collaboration in space that continue today. Meanwhile, robotic exploration reached new heights. The Mars Pathfinder mission of 1997 captured public imagination with the first rover on the Red Planet. This was followed by increasingly sophisticated Mars missions, from the twin rovers Spirit and Opportunity to the car-sized Curiosity. Each represented dramatic advances in autonomous operation, scientific capability, and engineering precision. By the early 2000s, America had established undisputed leadership across all aspects of space exploration: human spaceflight, space telescope science, planetary exploration, and international cooperation. The nation that wasn't first to space had thoroughly dominated it through persistence, innovation, and an unwavering commitment to pushing beyond the previously impossible. The early 21st century brought a transformation in America's approach to space, one that would ultimately strengthen its dominance rather than diminish it. As the Space Shuttle program prepared for retirement, NASA developed a two-pronged strategy: rely on private companies for access to low Earth orbit, while focusing government resources on deep space exploration beyond the Moon. This shift faced initial skepticism. When the final shuttle mission landed in July 2011, America temporarily lost independent human launch capability. Russian Soyuz rockets became the only way to reach the International Space Station. Critics questioned whether relinquishing this capability represented a retreat from space leadership. What followed instead was an entrepreneurial revolution. Companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin, founded by tech billionaires Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos respectively, brought Silicon Valley innovation to rocket science. The results were remarkable. SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket pioneered reusability by landing its first stage vertically after launch, something previously considered technically impossible or economically impractical. These private companies achieved dramatic cost reductions. The price of reaching orbit dropped by approximately 90% compared to the shuttle era. This made space access affordable for new players, spawning hundreds of space startups focused on everything from small satellites to lunar landers. America's commercial space sector grew exponentially, outpacing all other nations combined. In May 2020, astronauts launched from American soil again, when SpaceX's Crew Dragon carried NASA astronauts to the International Space Station. This represented not just a restoration of capability, but a fundamental improvement. The new vehicles incorporated decades of lessons learned, offering greater safety at lower cost. Meanwhile, NASA refocused on exploration beyond Earth orbit. The Curiosity and Perseverance rovers continued America's unbroken record of Mars exploration success. The James Webb Space Telescope, launched in 2021, provided unprecedented views of the earliest galaxies, revolutionizing astronomy just as Hubble had a generation earlier. Perhaps most significantly, NASA established the Artemis program to return humans to the Moon, not for short visits but for sustainable presence. Unlike Apollo, Artemis was designed from the beginning as an international effort, with partnerships spanning traditional allies and new spacefaring nations. The program aimed to establish a gateway station in lunar orbit, surface habitats, and eventually technologies to use lunar resources, creating a proving ground for eventual Mars missions. Commercial partnerships became central to this vision. NASA no longer designed and built every component as in the Apollo era. Instead, it set requirements and goals, allowing companies to innovate solutions. This approach accelerated development while spreading economic benefits across the aerospace industry. The military dimension of space also evolved. In 2019, the United States established the Space Force as a separate military branch, recognizing space as a critical domain for national security. This formalized the protection of space infrastructure that had become essential to modern life on Earth, from communications to navigation to weather prediction. By 2025, America had entered a new golden age of space development. Multiple American companies had operational human spacecraft. Commercial space stations were under construction to eventually replace the aging ISS. Robotic probes continued exploring the solar system. Plans for lunar bases progressed from concept to hardware. The United States had transformed its approach to space, creating an ecosystem where government and private innovation reinforced each other. The nation that wasn't first to enter space had completely redefined what space leadership meant, establishing a model that combined national purpose with entrepreneurial energy, a combination no other spacefaring power had successfully replicated. The culmination of America's space dominance story points toward the Red Planet. Mars has captivated human imagination for centuries, but transforming it from science fiction to destination requires overcoming unprecedented challenges. The journey represents the ultimate test of everything America's space program has learned over decades. Distance alone makes Mars missions extraordinarily difficult. At its closest approach, Mars lies 35 million miles from Earth, a journey requiring at least 6 months with current propulsion technology. Communication delays stretch to 20 minutes each way. Any emergency would require astronauts to solve problems without immediate mission control support. These realities drove NASA to develop increasingly autonomous systems, tested first on the Moon under Artemis, and later in deep space missions. The psychological challenges may prove equally daunting. Early Mars missions will likely last 2 to 3 years, with crews confined to spacecraft and habitats far smaller than the International Space Station. NASA's Human Research Program has studied isolation, confinement, and team dynamics extensively, using analogs like Antarctic stations and the Hawaii Space Exploration Analog and Simulation, HI-SEAS, facility to prepare for these unprecedented mission durations. Radiation protection represents another critical hurdle. Beyond Earth's protective magnetosphere, astronauts face increased cancer risk from galactic cosmic rays and solar particle events. American researchers pioneered new shielding materials and biomedical countermeasures, turning a potential showstopper into a manageable risk. These advances have applications beyond spaceflight, potentially benefiting cancer treatment and radiation workers on Earth. Perhaps most impressive is America's approach to in-situ resource utilization, using Martian materials rather than carrying everything from Earth. The Mach-C experiment on NASA's Perseverance rover successfully demonstrated oxygen production from the Martian atmosphere, a critical capability for both life support and rocket propellant. Further technologies under development aim to extract water from subsurface ice deposits and use Martian soil for construction materials. The economic model for Mars exploration evolved significantly from earlier space programs. Rather than a single government-funded push like Apollo, Mars efforts incorporate public-private partnerships from the beginning. Companies develop transportation systems, habitats, power generation, and life support under NASA standards, creating capabilities with both exploration and commercial applications. This partnership approach accelerated technological development while distributing costs. When humans finally set foot on Mars, likely in the mid-2030s, they will arrive not in a single government spacecraft, but in vehicles developed through this collaborative ecosystem, representing both national purpose and commercial innovation. Beyond Mars lies the outer solar system, where American robotic explorers have already blazed trails. The twin Voyager spacecraft, launched in the 1970s, continue returning data from interstellar space. The New Horizons mission transformed Pluto from a pixelated blur to a geologically complex world. The Europa Clipper mission, launching in the mid-2020s, will explore Jupiter's icy moon, potentially home to a subsurface ocean that could harbor life. America's ultimate space achievement may be how it inspired global participation in exploration. What began as a Cold War competition evolved into an inclusive enterprise drawing contributions from nations across every continent. The United States remains the central coordinating force, but increasingly shares both costs and benefits with international partners. From trailing the Soviets in the 1950s to establishing comprehensive leadership across human spaceflight, science, technology, and commercial development, America's space journey represents one of history's most impressive comebacks. The nation that wasn't first to space has definitively shaped humanity's future beyond Earth, creating a legacy that will endure as long as humans reach for the stars. The most profound impact of American space dominance may ultimately be economic rather than exploratory. While missions to distant worlds capture headlines, the revolution happening in Earth orbit has quietly transformed global commerce, communication, and daily life for billions of people. The space economy reached $469 billion globally by 2024, with American companies capturing approximately 60% of this rapidly growing sector. This represents a fundamental shift from the early decades of spaceflight, when government agencies drove virtually all activity. By the 2020s, private investment in space ventures exceeded government spending for the first time, creating a self-sustaining economic ecosystem. Satellite technology exemplifies this transformation. Early satellites were massive, expensive assets requiring dedicated rocket launches and costing hundreds of millions of dollars. The American-led small satellite revolution changed this paradigm completely. Companies like Planet and Spire deployed constellations of refrigerator-sized or smaller satellites that could be built on assembly lines and launched dozens at a time as rideshare payloads. This approach democratized access to space-based services. Earth observation data, once the exclusive domain of government intelligence agencies, became available to farmers monitoring crop health, insurance companies assessing disaster impacts, and environmental organizations tracking deforestation. The revisit rate, how frequently a satellite passes over the same location, improved from months to daily or even hourly coverage. Communications experienced similar disruption. American companies deployed massive constellations of thousands of satellites in low Earth orbit, providing high-speed internet to previously unserved regions. This connectivity bridged the digital divide for remote communities, enabled telemedicine in rural areas, and created new educational opportunities worldwide. Manufacturing in space emerged as perhaps the most unexpected economic frontier. Experiments aboard the International Space Station demonstrated that certain materials, particularly specialized optical fibers, pharmaceutical crystals, and biological tissues, could be produced with superior properties in microgravity. By the mid-2020s, the first commercial space factories began operating, producing high-value products impossible to create on Earth. Tourism represented another growth sector. What began with isolated flights for wealthy individuals expanded into regular orbital experiences accessible to upper-middle-class travelers. Hotels in low Earth orbit welcomed their first guests, marking the beginning of a hospitality industry beyond Earth. These developments generated not just revenue but public engagement, as visitors returned with transformative perspectives on our planet's beauty and fragility. The economic impact extended beyond space-focused companies. Traditional industries from agriculture to insurance incorporated space-derived data into their operations. Precision farming using satellite imagery increased crop yields while reducing water and fertilizer usage. Maritime shipping optimized routes using space-based tracking and weather forecasting. Even construction companies employed satellite-based ground deformation monitoring to detect potential structural issues before they became dangerous. Perhaps most significantly, the space economy created hundreds of thousands of high-skilled jobs across diverse disciplines. Engineers and scientists worked alongside manufacturers, software developers, lawyers, marketers, and finance professionals. Space companies established facilities in regions beyond traditional aerospace hubs, distributing economic benefits across the country. This economic transformation reinforced America's space leadership in a self-perpetuating cycle. Commercial success generated capital for further innovation. New technologies reduced costs, enabling more ambitious ventures. The entrepreneurial ecosystem attracted global talent to American companies and universities. International partners increasingly aligned with American standards and practices to access this thriving marketplace. By 2025, what began as a government-driven race with the Soviets had evolved into something far more powerful and sustainable, an economic engine generating prosperity, solving terrestrial problems, and funding humanity's continued expansion beyond Earth. Beyond scientific achievements and economic benefits, America's space dominance profoundly shaped global culture, imagination, and human identity. The images, stories, and possibilities that emerged from space exploration transformed how we see ourselves and our place in the cosmos. The Apollo missions provided humanity's first truly global shared experience. When Neil Armstrong stepped onto the lunar surface, people gathered around television sets in living rooms, public squares, and storefronts across every continent. For a brief moment, political divisions faded as viewers united in witnessing an achievement not of one nation but of human potential. The phrase Earthrise, referring to the iconic photograph taken by Apollo 8 astronauts showing our planet rising above the lunar horizon, entered the lexicon as a powerful symbol of our common home. This perspective shift, sometimes called the overview effect, consistently transforms astronauts regardless of nationality. American astronauts particularly emphasized how seeing Earth from space erased national boundaries and highlighted our planet's fragility. This perspective fueled environmental awareness and influenced the first Earth Day celebrations in 1970. The famous blue marble photograph, taken by Apollo 17 astronauts, became one of history's most reproduced images and a powerful symbol of the environmental movement. Space imagery reshaped artistic expression across all media. The Hubble Space Telescope's stunning portraits of nebulae, galaxies, and stellar nurseries influenced visual aesthetics in everything from fashion to architecture. Movies and television incorporated increasingly accurate depictions of spaceflight, with productions like Apollo 13, The Martian, and For All Mankind, blending entertainment with education about space challenges and solutions. American space achievements spawned generations of scientists and engineers who cite childhood inspiration from missions as their career motivation. The Apollo effect created enrollment surges in science and engineering programs during the 1960s. Similarly, Mars rover landings in the 1990s and 2000s inspired today's aerospace professionals. Each successful mission created new role models and pathways, particularly as astronaut and mission leadership diversity increased over time. Educational approaches evolved to incorporate space themes across subjects. What began as focusing on science and mathematics expanded to include space-themed literature, history, art, and even physical education mimicking astronaut training. The NASA Education Office developed curricula used worldwide, while space-themed museums and visitor centers attracted millions annually, making complex concepts accessible to the general public. Digital connectivity amplified these cultural impacts. The Mars rovers established social media presences with millions of followers. Astronauts aboard the International Space Station streamed live views of Earth and answered questions from classrooms globally. Virtual reality applications allowed users to experience spacewalks or Mars exploration. These direct connections transformed space from something distant and abstract into an accessible, shared human endeavor. Perhaps most profoundly, space exploration expanded humanity's sense of possibility. Problems once considered insurmountable yielded to persistent effort and innovation. The phrase, "if we can put a man on the moon," entered everyday language as shorthand for accomplishing the seemingly impossible. This problem-solving mindset transferred to challenges from medicine to climate change, inspiring approaches to terrestrial problems that might otherwise have seemed hopeless. By continually pushing boundaries of what humans could achieve, America's space program created a cultural legacy extending far beyond technology or national prestige. It demonstrated that our species could transcend immediate concerns and accomplish goals requiring decade-long commitments and unprecedented cooperation. This expanded sense of human potential may ultimately prove more valuable than any scientific discovery or economic benefit, a lasting gift to future generations who will venture even farther into the cosmos. As we look toward the mid-21st century and beyond, America's space dominance appears positioned to enter an entirely new phase, one where humanity becomes truly multiplanetary. The foundations laid through decades of exploration, technology development, and commercial expansion have created the launching pad for perhaps the most significant transition in human history. The Artemis program's establishment of a sustainable lunar presence represents just the first step in this longer journey. Unlike Apollo's brief visits, the lunar outposts of the 2030s will support rotating crews for months at a time. These habitats will test critical technologies for radiation protection, closed-loop life support, and psychological well-being that future Mars missions will require. The lunar surface also offers a unique laboratory for astronomy, with radio telescopes on the far side, shielded from Earth's electromagnetic noise, potentially revealing the universe's earliest moments. Lunar resources will transform the economics of deep space exploration. Water ice at the lunar poles, confirmed by multiple missions, can be processed into rocket propellant. This creates the possibility of a lunar gas station, dramatically reducing the cost of missions beyond Earth orbit. The regolith itself, rich in oxygen, titanium, and rare earth elements, offers raw materials for construction and manufacturing, potentially enabling the first factories beyond Earth using 3D printing and other advanced fabrication techniques. Mars settlements will build on these lunar foundations. Early expeditions in the 2030s will give way to more permanent research stations and eventually to self-sustaining communities. The technologies enabling this transition, from radiation shielding to closed-loop agriculture, will find applications on Earth addressing climate change, food security, and sustainable development. What begins as space infrastructure will cycle back to improve life on our home planet. The asteroid belt presents perhaps the most transformative economic frontier. A single metallic asteroid can contain trillions of dollars worth of platinum, gold, and rare metals essential for advanced technology. American companies have already demonstrated the technical capabilities for prospecting these resources, with test missions validating identification and retrieval techniques. When full-scale asteroid mining becomes viable in the 2040s, it will potentially end resource scarcity that has driven conflicts throughout human history. Solar system exploration will expand simultaneously through increasingly capable robotic missions. The moons of Jupiter and Saturn, particularly Europa, Enceladus, and Titan, harbor subsurface oceans that may contain the first examples of life beyond Earth. American missions will deploy submarines to explore these alien seas, potentially answering humanity's age-old question: are we alone in the universe? Underlying all these developments is a fundamental shift in how we conceptualize space itself. What once represented a final frontier, a distant realm to briefly visit, is evolving into an extension of human civilization. Space-based solar power will beam limitless clean energy to Earth. Manufacturing platforms will produce materials impossible to create under gravity. Research stations will develop medicines free from terrestrial contamination. Tourism will evolve from brief experiences to extended stays. Throughout this transformation, America's unique approach, blending government vision with private innovation, national purpose with international collaboration, positions it to maintain its leadership role. The country that wasn't first to space, but came to dominate it now stands poised to guide humanity's expansion into the solar system. This future isn't guaranteed. It requires sustained commitment, wise investment, and addressing challenges from space debris to planetary protection. Yet the trajectory established through decades of American space leadership suggests a profound truth. The greatest chapters in humanity's space story are still being written.